Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When Tom Bryant returned home after a 2-month vacation with his family, he expected to see his quiet, secluded property. Instead, he found a brand new cottage standing on his land, with tenants renting it through Airbnb. And the worst part? It was built without his permission. The HOA had made a huge mistake. Tom Bryant had always taken pride in his property, a sprawling 10-acre estate just outside the limits of the HOA-controlled neighborhood. It was his sanctuary, a space where he and his family could enjoy privacy, free from the restrictive rules of a homeowners association. Unlike the rows of cookie-cutter houses within the HOA's domain, Tom's land was open, bordered by trees, and had a long, winding driveway that ensured seclusion. His home was custom-built, a blend of rustic and modern, featuring a large deck overlooking a private pond. It was a stark contrast to the uniformity of the neighboring development, a difference that had not gone unnoticed by the HOA president, Linda Carmichael. For years, Tom had brushed off minor conflicts with the HOA. They had sent letters inviting him to join, claiming his land should be under their jurisdiction, but he ignored them. He wasn't legally bound to them, and he had no interest in becoming part of their rigid structure. Every attempt to pressure him into compliance had been met with firm refusals, and while the HOA's persistence annoyed him, he assumed they would eventually give up. Then came the 2-month family vacation to Europe. It was the trip of a lifetime, something he and his wife had planned for years. They left their home secured, with locked gates, surveillance cameras, and a security system in place. With their kids excited for adventure and their minds at ease, they boarded their flight, confident that their land would remain untouched. But upon their return, everything changed. As they pulled up to their property, something immediately felt wrong. The gates were missing. In their place stood a newly paved road leading directly onto their land. The sight of it made Tom's stomach drop. He accelerated, tires kicking up dust, and as they rounded a bend in the driveway, his wife gasped. A house stood where there had been nothing before. Not a shed, not a temporary structure. A fully built luxury cottage, complete with a neatly landscaped front yard, a mailbox, and even a small driveway. The design of the cottage matched the uniform aesthetic of the HOA community. It was as if a piece of their neighborhood had been dropped onto his land like an invasion force. But that wasn't the worst part. There were cars parked outside. People were living in it. Tom slammed on the brakes, his heart pounding as he stared at the surreal scene before him. His own land, the 10-acre property he had fought to keep private, now housed a fully built luxury cottage, complete with neatly trimmed hedges and a paved driveway. The cottage looked as if it had always belonged there, its aesthetic perfectly matching the HOA-controlled neighborhood nearby. But Tom knew better. 2 months ago, this space had been empty. As he stepped out of his truck, his wife clutched his arm, her voice tight with disbelief. "Tom, who are those people?" She pointed toward the cottage's porch, where a man in his mid-40s, casually dressed in shorts and a polo, lounged in a patio chair. Beside him, a woman scrolled through her phone while a child played in the front yard. They looked comfortable, at home. Tom took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm. He approached, his boots crunching against the newly laid gravel. The man on the porch looked up and grinned. "Hey there, you must be the new owners," the stranger said, standing up. "We've loved staying here. The listing said the property owner was expanding rental units, but we didn't expect such a personal welcome." Tom felt a surge of white-hot anger. A listing? Rental units? None of this made sense. This was his land, his home, and yet these people spoke as if they had every right to be there. "What listing?" Tom demanded. His voice was sharper than he intended, but he didn't care. "Who told you this place was available?" The woman glanced at her phone. "It's all here on Airbnb," she said, flipping the screen toward him. "Luxury cottage retreat, access to HOA amenities, private escape. Oh, and fully furnished. The reviews are amazing." Tom's breath caught. Reviews. That meant this wasn't new. People had been renting out a house on his land for weeks, possibly months. A cold realization settled over him. The HOA. Without another word, Tom stormed toward the cottage and yanked open the mailbox. Inside, among various promotional flyers, was an official-looking envelope, HOA letterhead. Hands shaking, he ripped it open. "Dear residents, we are pleased to welcome new members to our growing community. The successful expansion project has added another beautiful property to our neighborhood. As a reminder, HOA fees will be due at the end of the month. It was signed Linda Carmichael, HOA president. Rage flared in Tom's chest. They had claimed his land, built on it, rented it out, and now they expected him to pay HOA fees? Without hesitation, Tom turned on his heel and headed for his truck. He was going to have a word with Linda Carmichael. Tom drove straight to the HOA office, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. His mind raced with anger and disbelief. How could they have done this? They had built an entire house on his land without his permission. They had rented it out to strangers, collected profits, and now had the audacity to claim it was part of their community. This wasn't just overreach. This was theft. As he pulled into the parking lot of the HOA's administrative building, he barely threw the truck into park before jumping out. The modern glass-fronted office was meant to exude professionalism, but to Tom, it now reeked of corruption. He stormed inside, where a young receptionist glanced up with forced cheer. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked, smiling. "I need to speak with Linda Carmichael, now." Tom's voice was firm, unwavering. The receptionist hesitated, clearly thrown off by his intensity. "Do you have an appointment?" Tom leaned forward, planting both hands on the counter. "She built a house on my land while I was gone. Do you think I need an appointment?" That got her attention. The color drained from her face as she stammered, "Oh, one moment, sir." She disappeared down a hallway. Less than a minute later, Linda Carmichael herself emerged, her usual air of smug confidence wrapped around her like a tailored suit. "Tom," she greeted, her voice syrupy sweet. "I wasn't expecting you. What can I do for you?" Tom took a step forward, standing tall, unflinching. "You know exactly why I'm here." Linda sighed dramatically, shaking her head. "I assume this is about the expansion project. I was hoping you'd come around to seeing the benefits." Tom's jaw clenched. "The benefits? Linda, you built a damn house on my land. You rented it out. And now you're charging me HOA fees?" She raised an eyebrow, completely unfazed. "Correction, HOA facilitated the development of underutilized land to improve the community. The cottage was a necessary addition. The bylaws of our neighborhood allow for property expansion, and since your land borders our community, it made perfect sense." Tom let out a sharp laugh, utterly disbelieving. "You don't have jurisdiction over my property." Linda tilted her head. "That's debatable." The sheer arrogance of it made Tom's blood boil. "No, it's not." Linda pulled a folder from a nearby desk and flipped it open. "Your property was officially designated for residential inclusion under our expansion initiative. That means—" "Under what authority?" Tom cut in. Linda tapped a page with a perfectly manicured finger. "You signed off on it." Tom froze. "Excuse me?" She slid the paper toward him. And there it was. A document claiming that he had agreed to let HOA incorporate his land into the community, with his signature at the bottom. But it wasn't his signature. Tom grabbed the paper, his eyes scanning every detail. The signature was a crude forgery. The strokes were wrong. The ink didn't match his usual pen. And there, at the very bottom, was the date. It claimed he had signed it while he was in Europe. He looked back at Linda, his voice dangerously low. "This is fraud." Linda simply smiled. "That's for the courts to decide." Tom exhaled sharply through his nose. "Then I hope you have a damn good lawyer." Linda's smile widened. "Oh, Tom, HOA has plenty of lawyers. The real question is, do you?" Tom had walked in expecting resistance. What he hadn't expected was outright criminality. Linda had no intention of backing down. If anything, she was daring him to fight back. Fine, he would. Tom stormed out of the HOA office, his pulse hammering in his ears. Fraud. That was the only word for it. They forged his signature. They built on his land, rented it out, and now they were gaslighting him into believing he had agreed to it. And the worst part, they were confident they would get away with it. Linda's smug words echoed in his mind. That's for the courts to decide. She wasn't just unbothered. She was daring him to fight. Fine, he would fight, and he would win. Back at home, Tom wasted no time. He retrieved every document related to his property, the deed, tax records, aerial surveys, even the official zoning maps. His land was clearly marked as private property, with no mention of HOA jurisdiction. There was no loophole, no gray area. The HOA had fabricated their claim from thin air. But that wasn't enough. He needed proof of their deception. He turned to his security cameras. The system had been running while he was away, storing footage to the cloud. He scrolled through weeks of recordings, his stomach twisting as he saw what had transpired in his absence. Week 1, HOA contractors arriving with bulldozers. They ripped out his fence. Week 2, foundation being laid, workers moving efficiently. HOA wasn't just behind this, they had planned it months in advance. Week 3, landscaping crews, painters, and interior decorators. They furnished the house. They made it look like it had always been there. Week 4, Linda Carmichael herself giving a real estate tour to prospective renters, smiling, laughing, shaking hands, as if she owned the place. Tom clenched his fists. She was personally profiting from this. HOA wasn't just strong-arming him, it was a scam. But he needed more. Tom dug deeper. If Linda was renting the cottage, there had to be a money trail. He contacted a lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Jessica Reed, who specialized in property law. Jessica didn't waste time. She pulled up county records and financial transactions tied to HOA properties. And there it was. The rental payments weren't going to the HOA. They were going directly to an LLC under Linda's name. Tom felt a surge of triumph. This wasn't just a civil dispute anymore. It was embezzlement, fraud, and property theft. Linda had no idea what was coming. Tom sat in his home office, surrounded by stacks of documents, open case files, and the glow of his laptop screen. The evidence was damning. HOA had committed fraud. They had forged his signature, stolen his land, built an unauthorized structure, and rented it out for profit, lining Linda Carmichael's own pockets. But gathering proof was just the beginning. Now it was time to strike back. With his lawyer, Jessica Reed, at the helm, Tom filed an immediate lawsuit against Linda Carmichael and the HOA, citing trespassing, forgery, property fraud, and illegal construction. They demanded an emergency injunction to prevent the HOA from collecting any further rental income and an immediate cease and desist order. But they weren't stopping there. Jessica also filed a criminal complaint with the district attorney's office. With the forged documents and financial records in hand, Linda wasn't just facing civil penalties, she was facing felony fraud charges. And then they went public. Tom had already suspected that he wasn't HOA's first victim, just the first one willing to fight back. So he reached out to local news stations. They ate the story up. A powerful HOA president seizing private land through fraud. That was headline gold. Within 48 hours, reporters were knocking on Tom's door, eager to hear his side of the story. The backlash was immediate. Neighbors who once trusted HOA were outraged. Some had their own complaints: unfair fines, forced renovations, even harassment. Homeowners within the HOA began questioning their own documents. Had Linda forged other signatures? The city council took notice. A formal investigation into HOA practices was launched. Linda felt the heat. Predictably, HOA didn't back down. Instead, they went on the offensive. First came the frivolous counterclaims, a lawsuit against Tom for violating HOA regulations. The sheer absurdity of it was laughable. He wasn't even part of the HOA. But the goal wasn't to win. It was to bury him in legal fees and stall the real case. Then, the harassment escalated. Tom's mailbox was stuffed with fake violation notices. HOA security began patrolling his land, demanding that he check in at the gate. His water was mysteriously shut off for a full day. A petition circulated among HOA members calling him a neighborhood menace. But nothing compared to what Linda did next. Tom came home one evening to find a bright red notice taped to his front door. Eviction notice. You are hereby ordered to vacate the premises within 72 hours. Failure to comply will result in legal removal from the property. Issued by Homeowners Association of Silver Pines. Tom laughed out loud. They were trying to evict him from his own land. He yanked the notice down, stormed inside, and called Jessica. They just declared war. Jessica didn't hesitate. Then it's time we finish it. The courtroom was packed. Journalists lined the back rows, their cameras poised to capture what had become the most scandalous HOA lawsuit the town had ever seen. Silver Pines HOA had always been known for its aggressive enforcement, but this Stealing land, forging documents, and trying to evict a rightful property owner. It was unprecedented. Tom sat beside his lawyer, Jessica Reed, watching as Linda Carmichael took her seat at the defendant's table, exuding false confidence. She had a team of expensive attorneys, all paid for by HOA funds, but no amount of legal muscle could erase the evidence stacked against her. The judge, a stern-faced woman in her 60s, called the court to order. We are here today to determine the legality of the actions taken by Silver Pines HOA and its president, Linda Carmichael, regarding the unauthorized construction and rental of a property on the plaintiff's land. The trial had begun. Linda's lawyers were first to speak, painting Tom as the villain. They claimed he had signed the expansion agreement, welcoming the HOA's improvements to his land. They argued that Tom's land had been unused and the cottage was a benefit to the community. They insisted the eviction notice was valid, since he failed to comply with HOA regulations. Tom clenched his fists. None of it was true. But their strategy was clear: bury the court in technicalities and hope the real crime got lost in the details. Jessica was having none of it. Jessica stood, smooth and composed. Your Honor, the defense is trying to rewrite reality. Allow me to introduce actual facts. She called the county records official to the stand. The official confirmed that Tom's land had never been zoned for HOA jurisdiction. He testified that there was no legal basis for the expansion claims. And then, the bombshell. Can you confirm if Mr. Bryant ever signed any HOA agreement? Jessica asked. The official held up the document HOA had submitted as proof. The fake signature. This is a forgery. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Linda's face paled. Jessica wasn't done. Next, Jessica played Tom's security footage. Footage of HOA bulldozers tearing down Tom's fence. Footage of Linda personally giving a real estate tour of the illegal cottage. Footage of Linda accepting cash payments from renters. The judge turned to Linda, her expression unreadable. Mrs. Carmichael, would you like to explain why you were collecting personal profits from a property you claim belongs to the HOA? Linda fidgeted in her seat. Her lawyers whispered furiously, but there was no explaining this. Then came the financial records. Jessica revealed the payments from Airbnb, the transactions leading directly to Linda's personal LCL, hundreds of thousands of dollars in undeclared income. The courtroom was silent. Linda looked like she wanted to sink through the floor. The judge finally spoke. Her voice was ice cold. This isn't just a civil case. This is criminal fraud. Mrs. Carmichael, you are facing serious consequences. Linda broke. It wasn't just me, she blurted. The entire board knew. Her lawyers hissed at her to stop, but it was too late. The court ruled in Tom's favor. HOA was ordered to pay $750,000 in damages. Linda was personally charged with fraud, embezzlement, and trespassing. The illegal cottage, to be demolished immediately. As the judge banged her gavel, Linda collapsed into her chair, defeated. Tom let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He had won. But it wasn't over yet, because now it was time to take that cottage down. The morning of the demolition arrived with an almost electric energy in the air. Tom stood at the edge of his 10-acre property, arms crossed, watching as a crew of demolition workers prepared their equipment. The illegal cottage, the symbol of HOA corruption and Linda Carmichael's arrogance, stood before him, pristine but doomed. The court had ruled in his favor. The fraudulent structure was to be removed at HOA's expense, and Linda Carmichael was facing criminal charges. The HOA board had tried to stall the process, claiming they needed time to assess alternative solutions. But the judge had no patience for their delays. The demolition was set, and there was nothing they could do about it. A crowd had gathered. Reporters eager to document the downfall of the once powerful HOA president positioned their cameras for the perfect shot. Neighbors, some former Linda supporters, others longtime skeptics, whispered among themselves, watching the spectacle unfold. And there, standing apart from the rest, was Linda Carmichael herself. She looked nothing like the confident woman who had once dictated every aspect of the community. Her designer suit was replaced with a plain blazer, her usual smug expression gone. The trial had left her ruined, financially, socially, and legally. With fraud charges looming, her assets frozen, and her reputation destroyed, she was now just another disgraced figure. She had come to watch the house she built crumble, Tom walked up to the demolition foreman. "Let's do this." The man nodded, raising his arm. With a single sharp motion, he signaled the excavator operator. The massive machine roared to life, its metal claw rising high into the sky before slamming into the side of the cottage. The first impact shattered a wall, sending debris flying. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Another crash and the roof caved in. By the third strike, the house was nothing but splintered wood and crumbling drywall. Tom watched without an ounce of regret. This wasn't just about a house. It was about taking back what was his. Linda turned away, her face pale. The weight of her downfall was finally sinking in. She had lost everything. As the dust settled, Tom exhaled. For the first time in months, his land was truly his again. The battle was over, and he had won. In the days following the demolition, a sense of finality settled over Tom's property. The illegal cottage was gone, reduced to a pile of rubble that the HOA was forced to clean up at their expense. The land was his again, untouched, just as it had been before Linda Carmichael's power-hungry scheme. But the fallout from the trial and demolition extended far beyond his property lines. The entire community had changed, with Linda facing multiple criminal charges, including fraud, forgery, and embezzlement. The HOA was in freefall. Several board members resigned in disgrace, afraid they'd be next to face legal scrutiny. Homeowners who once blindly followed HOA's rules started demanding transparency, questioning past decisions. A full audit was ordered, revealing years of financial mismanagement and unethical practices. By the end of the month, a vote was held. Silver Pines HOA was officially disbanded. The neighborhood would no longer be governed by a corrupt association, and for the first time in years, homeowners were free to make decisions about their own properties without interference. For many, it was a victory they never expected. With the legal battles behind him, Tom finally had peace. His land was secure, the forged documents nullified, and the harassment was over. But something had changed. He wasn't just some guy minding his own business anymore. Neighbors who had once ignored him now sought his advice. Some asked about their own property rights, realizing they had been manipulated by HOA rules for years. Others just wanted to thank him for standing up when no one else would. Tom hadn't set out to be a symbol of resistance against HOA corruption, but that's exactly what he had become. She lost everything. Her home was seized to pay restitution. Her assets were frozen. She was banned from serving on any HOA board ever again. In the end, she tried to quietly leave town, hoping to escape the public disgrace. But her name had become synonymous with greed and corruption. No one would forget what she did. Standing on his reclaimed land, Tom reflected on everything he had been through. The battle had been long, exhausting, and infuriating, but it had proven one thing. If you don't stand up for your property, someone else will take it. And thanks to him, no one in this town would ever let an HOA cross that line again.